in this part, you'll see the default orientation or default instance is the standard orientation with X, Y, and Z pointing upward, the Z axis, okay? So that is your default orientation. Let's go, first thing you need to do is go up and look at the machine definition again. Now, do that right there so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we got our machine type set to 5-axis, and then we have our configuration. In 5-axis, you can have a head-to-head configuration, which means the gumball or the head actually has 2 rotational axes in it. If you look back again, let's go back. If you look at this, see this head right here, you got the 4th axis and the 5th axis. Each one of those axes can rotate along with the spindle itself. Okay, so these 2 axes are being defined in this dialog right here. So we have a 5-axis set to head, and then it could also be a table head. In other words, your 4th and 5th axis could be in the table, or it could be all axes can be in the table. In this particular example, we have both rotational axes in the head itself. So with this set to 5-axis, you need to define your 4th primary axis. As you recall, in the 4-axis machine, we set this to the 4th rotational axis. So it is considered or labeled the primary axis. After the 3 axes, this is the primary 4th axis. And in this case, we have it defined as positive Z. You look at the green arrow, okay? So this is our 4th rotational axis in the head. And then down here, we have our 5th secondary axis. It's called, again, it's called primary and secondary. And we have it set to positive Y. Okay, so you should see on the Y axis right here in red arrow. So that is your 5th secondary axis. You need to make
the
sure.
Reason, Don, I want to explain what primary and secondary are. The primary axis is the axis on which the other axis rotates. So, for instance, if you had a B and a C axis, and C is the primary axis, well, C means it's rotating about the Z axis. And when that head rotates about the C, it also rotates the other axes, while that is the secondary axis. The secondary axis is affected by the primary rotation of the primary axis. But the primary axis, if the secondary axis rotates by itself, it does not affect the primary axis. That's why we name it primary and secondary. I hope it makes sense.
And I assume, Joe, you might see both those in effect if it's doing an approach or an unwind or something to get to the next operation. Does that affect, which way it unwinds? So which is the primary and the secondary? Does that affect that?
Each machine is built differently, so it really depends on the machine builder. Okay. So, and we basically define the machine here by saying which is secondary and which is primary. So.
Okay. So again, in the 5th axis, very critical. You need to make sure that you have this set. And then also, Joe, I assume we have to have the output to local if we're doing indexed. Is that
yes, yes, and you're correct in most of the cases, but it really depends on how your post is set up. Your post can do a lot of interesting things. So if especially with the new programmable posts, we have access to both the setup coordinates as well as the machine coordinates. Mm-hmm. So if your post is set up in a way that it can access both, it really doesn't matter what you're outputting. But if you are using the legacy posts, yes, you want to make sure everything is output in the setup coordinate system. Okay. Otherwise, it's not going to be correct. So.
Yeah, let's go into the post setup, and we'll look at it in just a second. So okay. We have output and local coordinate systems, okay, and we have our axes limit set to no limit. You can set these whatever your machine limits are. And again, this needs to be set up correctly, or you won't get this correct posted output. So you need to make sure, and this is in conjunction with the post, as Joe mentioned. So we're going to look at the post just a second. Let's pick OK there, or just cancel there. So in the your indexed positions, we start at setup 1. Okay, let's turn our toolpaths on. Okay, so we have this is all in the standard setup 1. It's just a standard orientation, no index, no additional axes are really coming into play at this point. So we got our facing, roughing, etc., all of the operations to machine from the top side. Okay, and then we do, and again, obviously, I want to reiterate this too. We talked about the limitations of the express and the standard when you're talking about indexed machining. You can only do basically flip machining or manual indexing in 3-axis, where you machine one side, you got to flip the part to machine the second side in that same orientation, because you only have one orientation to machine in both the express and the standard. Okay, when you get up in the expert, you still only have those 3-axis. You only have those manual flipping, but you also have a 4th axis that you can use. In 5-axis, you have to have the premium configuration in order to be able to output your coordinates in the indexed 5-axis locations. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that was understood. So basically, we have setup 2, which is on the right side. If you see that the Z is pointing on the right, let's just look at these operations. So this is the drilling and hole profiling. And then setup 3, which is oriented. And again, these orientations are defined by the setup dialog. And you will only see this dialog if you have multi-axis configurations. If you try to access the dialog, it'll just come up and say you can't, you can't do an additional setup, or you can't change the configuration or the orientation of the setup in the standard express, standard, and expert. So pro, you can see this dialog. Premium, you can see this dialog. Okay.